Last time, we talked about Mackey's paper, Evil and Omnipotence, and the film The Seventh Seal by Ingmar Bergman. Now, we stopped after a brief discussion of Mackey's response to the free will theodicy. The theodicy, by the way, is the attempt to reconcile the existence of evil with God's perfection and supposed existence. And remember, we're all about resolving tensions, right? So this is a tension resolver. Now, I didn't spend all that much time talking about the film, I guess. I think, like I said, I think it's pretty straightforward. And we talked about the divine hiddenness stuff and how that's kind of an interesting nod to a new problems. There's a few recent papers about that. If you're interested, let me know. I'll send them on to you. So now let's talk about Plantinga and the free will defense. So to begin, he kind of restates the problem of evil as we see it in Mackey. And this we call the logical problem of evil. And the idea is that it's a logical problem because the set of propositions, God exists, God's perfect, evil exists, seem to be inconsistent. That is, they can't all be true at the same time. And that leads to a worry. And he also talks about another version of the problem of evil. It's called the evidential problem of evil. It's the idea that the existence of vast and needless suffering gives us like good evidence that God doesn't exist. And the free will theodicy is meant to offer a resolution to both problems. But again, he's only talking about moral evil here in this paper. I don't think what he says has much to say about natural evil, which we sort of talked about a bit last time. So the idea, again, in brief, is that it's very important to God that we have free will, that we're free to choose. And it's so important, in fact, that at least some evil is tolerable. And you'll recall the objection from Mackey, right, along the lines of, but couldn't God have made the world in which we always choose freely but choose the good thing? And as we saw last time, that's not going to work, right? We're free to cultivate our own dispositions, but if our dispositions are sort of like input or pre-installed, then the results of those dispositions seem not free. It seems like there's a worry. Now, there's a lot of moving parts in this paper, and I really don't expect you to track everything that's going on. What I want you to get out of it is a deeper understanding of philosophical methodology. Now, we saw a bit of this in the Plato we talked about. We saw some more in the Mackey, where he sort of puts the argument in premise, conclusion form, all this sort of thing. But we get a really nice look at it here. So what in particular am I talking about? Well, in the first place, Plantinga does, what philosophy and philosophers do best, right? I think it's kind of painfully clear about what exactly the view is and what the supposed problems are, right? So we get like really, really dialed in on the propositions that are at issue. And then he states like the objections to the view with like a really similar level of precision. And this allows us to like really home in on the weak points in the objections. So like think about the objection from Anthony Flew in the paper. He was a famous atheist who later became a deist, which is to say one who believes that there's something out there, some intelligence or something. Maybe not the God of the Old Testament or the God of Islam, but something. So, for example, like Flew relies on a notion of causal determinism, which we'll talk about in the lectures to come, what that means precisely. But Flew doesn't really spell it out. And Plantinga, therefore, spells it out for him. But he then shows how when we spell out causal determinism in a way that makes sense, we don't get the kind of freedom that Plantinga thinks is required, and so, Flew's objection shown not to work. So getting really precise in this kind of way, saying really clearly what the objector meant to say, so clearly, in fact, that the objector would probably go, yeah, that's what I meant. Like, that's a thing we do in philosophy. That's when we're doing our best. And doing so allows Plantinga to tease out sort of the logical entailments the objector might not have intended, which in turn lead to a conclusion that's altogether different than what they meant to conclude. And in this we really see in Plantinga's treatment of Mackey's argument, right? So he lays it out, a sort of premise, conclusion form in like a really precise and regimented kind of way, right? He then sort of concedes that some of the premises are true. He's like, look, you gotta deal with these ones. Like, these are true. What do you say? But then he shows that some of the premises taken together entail a weird conclusion. And in the way that Mackey's argument, when precisified to the degree that Plantinga does, it shows this weird thing that God could create humans that are not created by God. But that can't be right. That doesn't make any sense. I can't make a cup of coffee that was not made by me. I'm the one who made it. Similarly, God couldn't create humans that he didn't create. That'd be weird. But some of the things that Mackey has said, as you see in the paper, sort of lead to this conclusion. So what that shows is that that premise needs a little bit of alteration, right? We need to take and tweak it a bit. But then, once we've tweaked it a bit, we got to figure out where that goes. And where that goes, I think Plantinga shows pretty clearly, is to somewhere that Mackey didn't intend, and he didn't mean for the argument to go. Right? So what happens in the paper is we sort of have this weird consequence, so we need to clean up one of the premises. But that premise winds up being ambiguous between two interpretations, which shows that the argument needs a bit of work. We got to disambiguate the ambiguous premise, right? And then sort of take it either way just to see how it goes. If we take it one way, we have no reason to accept the conclusion. So that's bad. If we take it the other way, then the conclusion is question begging, right? And that's a technical term in philosophy. It means something like it presupposes the very thing it's trying to prove, or it's helping itself to premises or a conclusion that it's one's interlocutors wouldn't grant. So again, I'm going sort of just quickly over this because the details aren't what I want you to get out of the paper. What I want you to get out of the paper is the kinds of moves that philosophers make, right? The kind of methodology we employ. So we have this argument, right? On its face, at first glance, it seems like Mackey's doing really well, right? It seems like he's shown us a reason to worry about belief in the existence of God. Or more than that, to show that we should believe that God doesn't exist. But Plantinga says, well, let's take a look at your argument and really get clear about what it's saying. Well, in the first place, the way you put it has this weird consequence. So that can't be what you meant, because that's crazy. Well, if we clean that up, we wind up having a bit of ambiguity as to what you might have meant if you didn't mean the thing that leads to the weird conclusion. But on either way of cleaning that up, of disambiguating the sort of the adjusted premise, we don't get the conclusion you want, namely that God doesn't exist. So it's just this sort of very careful and considered and precise way of maneuvering that I think makes philosophy a bit different and a bit more. I don't know. I don't want to say more anything. It's just a bit different from other disciplines. It's really all about teasing out these kinds of things. That's part of the essence, I think, of philosophical inquiry, and I think that's one thing we get very nicely in the first 8 or so pages of this paper. Even though it is quite complex, I confess that I had forgotten how difficult the latter half of the paper is until I was rereading it the other week. So we're just going to read a bit, and I just want you to see sort of the chess match that can be philosophy. Okay, so now let's talk about the movie. Again, the major upshot to all this is well, there seems to be this problem where God's existence isn't, and his being the kinds of ways we think he is inconsistent with the existence of evil. One way we sort of get around that is to say, well, look, free will. That's the real thing. The free will is what's important. It's important that we're the ones making the decisions and that we're choosing the good thing of our own volition. And yeah, I think that's all right. I think we can probably get on board with that a little bit. But you might wonder whether, even given that free will is going to lead to a little bit of evil and like free will is a real good, you might wonder, like, holy cow, like this much evil? Like really this kind of evil? Like this is what we have to contend with just so we can choose freely? I don't know if it's worth it. And I think the last couple of films we've watched, No Country for Old Men and The Seventh Seal, like really give us a way of visualizing this in a way that we otherwise might not be able to. I mean, you can get a fair bit of this if you just watch the news. If you read any kind of nonfiction stuff about these kinds of issues, if you've just kind of lived life, I think we can get an idea. But I think No Country really shows what like wanton evil looks like in the form of Anton Chigurh and all that. And I think The Seventh Seal does too. And I think that the theist is on the hook for explaining like why these kinds of evil are okay. Like, couldn't God have made a world where we have free will and we can choose evil, but like there's a cap? Like, isn't that a way it might have gone? So we don't have an answer here. Like, I'm not sure what we ought to say about the problem of evil. I'm not sure that we have a sufficient resolution. But our discussion this and last time should give you an idea like what the back and forth looks like. And hopefully watching the films that we have has given you an idea of just like what's going on. What kind of evil the theist has to contend with. And never mind that they seem not to have a response to these worries about natural evil. Human suffering that's caused just by the way the world is rather than by the free choices of other humans. So that's going to do it for this time. A little shorter this time. Hopefully you appreciate the shortness of it. These are running a bit longer than I expected. So a short one is good from time to time. So I look forward to hearing what you have to say about No Country and about the paper on the discussion boards. Please head over there and say something cool or have a cool question. I look forward to reading them. So next time we'll move on to thinking about free will, right? Even if we think that free will is the right answer to the problem of evil, there's still a question of whether we have free will. Seems like we have to, if the answer to the problem of evil that we've sort of pursued here is going to work. And so for the next 3 classes, we'll be talking about free will. So I look forward to chatting with you more at that time. All right. Bye-bye.